Hi everyone. We have chosen for our Compute 466 project to work with natural language processing and comparing Surprisal in language models. Natural language processing is a subfield of AI which is used to help machines understand the human language. It was popularized in the 1950s by Alan Turing, which he mentioned in a paper, a computer can only be considered intelligent if it could carry out a conversation with a human without the human realizing they were talking to a machine. Since then, natural language processing has made great strides in AI and is used on a daily basis from spell check, next word prediction, and grammar checking software. For this prediction problem, we obtained our dataset from a Kaggle repository containing approximately 100,000 sentences. Before training, we pre-processed the data to remove punctuation, convert all characters to lowercase, and remove any sentences that included numbers. We exclude these sentences with numbers because predicting numerical information is outside the scope of our project and we didn't want it to affect our models. This is a supervised learning problem with multi-class labels. When we make a prediction, we're predicting a word from a set of all unique words present in our dataset. In our processed dataset, there are approximately 17,000 unique words. For our project, we implemented two models, n-gram and recurrent neural networks. N-grams are a model that essentially takes a sequence of n-1 words and will predict the next word that will follow. It is a probabilistic model that is trained on a large collection of text. It is used in a large number of NLP applications, including speech recognition, machine translation, and a predictive text input. Our model incorporates Laplace smoothing, which will improve the accuracy of our model when zero probability scenarios are encountered. RNNs, on the other hand, exhibit similar behavior to how a human brain functions. Using the RNN hyperparameters, we can fine-tune them to make our model train faster, more efficiently, or with higher accuracy based on the input training data. Due to the memory restrictions on our computers, we can't train on the largest data sets that we process, which gives us a low generalization. For our models, we measured performance using accuracy, time complexity, space complexity, perplexity, and surprisal. Accuracy is the simplest of these measurements and is simply the number of correct predictions divided by the number of total predictions made. For an NLP problem such as this one, we should expect relatively low accuracies considering there are often many possible ways to continue a sentence that are both grammatically and contextually correct. Time and space complexities measure how well the algorithm uses a computer's resources. Perplexity measures how well a distribution predicts a sample, and surprisal measures the information conveyed by a linguistic event. It has been claimed that the cognitive effort required to process a word is proportional to its surprisal. Our n-gram findings show that we have testing accuracy between 5 and 10% depending on the datasets. The perplexity shown changes with n. We want to see lower perplexity since that means that the model is less surprised to see the test data. In our model, we see that the perplexity is a minimum when n equals 5 for the small data set, which is on the top right, and n equals 6 for the large data set on the bottom right. This is suspected because we believe that the corpus becomes large enough that it will improve generalization within the model, which causes the number of possible predictions to increase. It also makes sense for a larger data set to have an ideal n to be larger since we have more data to train with, and therefore our model should benefit from having an extra n in the n-gram. I will now hand this off to Brock, who will continue on with RNN.
Thank you, Michael. Now I will go over our findings for the RNN. We noticed that the accuracy of our model ranged anywhere from 5 to 14% depending on the dataset that we used and the hyperparameters we tuned. We performed some manual tests as well to see why we had such a range of accuracies lower than we would expect. However, the words from the model we would predict, while may not be correct, still made sense, which gave us a little more confidence than the displayed accuracy. Since RNN models are very memory intensive, the time and space complexity increases at a higher rate, as shown by the two big O notations. We can measure the information conveyed by any given linguistic event encountered in some context. This is called surprisal. In surprisal theory, the surprisal of word X given the model in a context partial sentence is defined shown in the formula above. So basically, to calculate the surprisal, all we need is the probability distribution of the next words. For RNN, let's take a look at the following sample input. It should be crucial too, as our context. The probability distribution provided by the RNN model we trained is represented in the graph. Next word suggestions are be, right, survive, and so on. Surprisal will be high when X has low conditional probability as we move further to the right on the graph, and low when X has a high probability, which is further on the right on the graph. Here are some charts that display our RNN's accuracy. The most significant takeaway from these is that our model is very prone to overfitting by noticing our test accuracy is much lower than the training accuracy. Even with the overfitting, we believe approximately 10% is relatively strong considering our dictionary is about 17,000 words long. Here are some other charts that display the time per epoch against various parameters of the data, such as the number of samples, average sentence length, and number of unique words in our dataset. For each of these collections of data, we isolated one of the parameters and held the other three constant. The increase in time was approximately linear for all the parameters. Results from both NGRAM and RNN hovered around 10% accuracy. Our NGRAM models were able to be trained on much larger datasets since the memory footprint is much smaller than that of RNN. Our RNN model had training accuracies upwards of 50% in some cases due to our overfitting, but the test accuracies were 5 to 15%, which is concerning and an obvious tell that our model is subject to overfitting. This could largely be due to the fact that our machines could not handle the large memory demands of our RNN model training, as well as some extra hyperparameter tuning needed to be done. As mentioned earlier, some extra manual testing was done to see what sort of predictions our model was producing when they were labeled as incorrect. We noticed that a vast majority of the predictions were plausible since they clearly made sense in the context, and they could be dependent on who wrote the sentence or in what context. While having a 10% accuracy seems very low, it is useful to note that this percentage is much better than randomly guessing a word. For our data and algorithm analysis, the primary thing that we noticed about our models is that the frequency in which a word is predicted highly corresponds to how often it appears in our dataset. For example, the word "the" appears 6,204 times in our dataset, which contains approximately 100,000 words. This is about 6% of the time. 6% of all words are "the." This is not good because if we made our predictions solely based on how frequent the word appears in our dataset, we would likely get very similar results. To briefly summarize, both RNN and NGRAM models were approximately 10% accurate on the testing data. Our RNN model had a higher upper bound for the data we used when we tuned the hyperparameters. Both models gave us plausible next words, even though they were technically incorrect predictions. The RNN models that we trained were victims of overfitting, and with more computing power, we would be able to train on larger datasets, which means we could theoretically get a better generalization. If we had another semester to work on this project, we would focus our attention on the following areas. First, we'd probably want to tune the hyperparameters in our RNN model to improve the performance of it. After that, we would pursue some other models. One we were thinking of was RNNG, but unfortunately we did not have the opportunity to implement it this semester. It would also be interesting to see how this type of prediction problem works in other languages other than English, so we would like to experiment with that as well. Finally, we think we would get very different results if we changed how we pre-process the data. For example, we could generalize all rare words, or words that appear less than, say, 0.5% of the time as an example, into a simple rare tag, generalizing them all into the same term. This would actually save a lot of memory, and as a result, we could train on a much larger data set. Here is our bibliography and all the sources we use to create our reports, and thank you very much for taking the time to watch this.